Welcome to Excel Magic Trick number 1382. Hey, if you want to download this Excel workbook, Excel Magic Trick 1382 start or the finished file so you can follow along, click on the link below the video. Hey, we got a great video here. We got to talk about how to extract records with multiple contains or partial text criteria. Now we're going to have 3 examples. We'll see filter, advanced filter with formula criteria, and an array formula. Hey, here's our data set. And for each record, we have a potential employee with a bunch of information. But the column we're interested in is job title. We actually need to find any record that contains the word data, analytics, BI, business intelligence, DAX, Power Pivot, or machine learning. If we were doing this manually, we'd have to check each one, performing an OR logical test on each job title for each record. We would have to ask the question, does this job title contain the text data, or analytics, or BI, or any of the other items in this list? And we'd have to do that for every single record. Now, we can think of this 3 ways. Contains criteria. Does this contain any of the items in this list? Partial text criteria. Does the entire job title or any part of it match any item in this list? And of course, this is an OR logical test. So we can think of it that way. And actually, later that'll help us, because if we're doing an OR logical test, remember, an OR logical test means one or more truths in all the different tests we're running. So we're going to have to worry about whether, if we get, for example, data and BI, we don't want to double count when we're counting how many records match. All right, now, one way I don't think I want to do this, and I really want to label this up here, not just filter, but filter and helper column. And here's the reason why. We definitely can turn the filter on. We click in a single cell. This is a proper data set, meaning there's field names at the top, records and rows, and empty cells all the way around the data set. I click in a single cell, go up to data. And there's the filter button. Notice there's a keyboard Ctrl Shift L, and Ctrl Shift L is a toggle. If you can't remember that keyboard for filter, you can use the old keyboard from Excel 2003 or earlier, Alt D FF. And that was easy to remember because it's data, filter, filter. And here's why I don't want to actually use the built-in filter, because there's no doubt we could go down to text filters, contains. But once we get to here, not only can't we connect this text box to any data in the cells, but it looks like we only have OR, but only 2 options. So we're not going to use that. Even if we could figure out how to list all the criteria here, we'd have to type it in. And I don't want to do that. I'm going to click Escape. So here's our helper column. And we want a true or false, indicating that this job title contains one or more of these items. Now, anytime we're doing contains criteria, I immediately think of the search function. Now, the search function's awesome. You can tell it to find some particular text, and we're just going to have search look just for data, comma, within, and I'm going to pick this one down here, Data Analytics Officer. Now, close parentheses, and search will look for the word data and report the position it finds in this text string, meaning the position of the character. For us, it'll be 1 because it starts in the first character. Control Enter, and we can see it delivers a 1, F2. But I need to check all of these items simultaneously. So here we go. Find text argument inside of search is expecting 1 single item. I'm going to give it, and I'm going to click there, I'm going to give it all of the items. As soon as we do that, we're doing what is called a function argument array operation, meaning I put 7 items into that find text argument. That will instruct search function to spit out 7 answers simultaneously. So I come to the end, F9, and notice it gives us an array of positions. And of course, it found data in the first position, and then analytics in the 6th position. Search will always deliver 7 answers, and they will always either be the position, which is a number, or some error. Control Z. Now I actually want to copy this down, so I'm going to click, and I'm going to click on Find Text Argument to highlight that whole range. Use the F4 key to lock it. Now, within text, I actually want to click on Asset Manager. That means the job title for this record. Now, search is ready to copy down, except for search is delivering an array of errors and numbers. I need to convert that array into trues and falses. So every time it sees a number, it'll report a true. So we can use the ISNUMBER function. Now, this also is a function argument array operation, because remember, there are numbers and errors there. Close parentheses at the end, F9. That is looking good for this record because none of these items. When we copy this down, of course, Data Analytics Officer will get a true and a true. Control Z. Now, I'm going to copy this down just for a moment because I want to specifically go down and look right here for Data Analytics. I'm going to hit F2 and then F9. Remember, we're running an OR logical test. So all we need is one or more trues. I'm going to click Escape to revert back to what was in the cell before I put it in edit mode, which means it will revert back to the formula. I'm going to come up here, F2. We're running an OR logical test. So guess what? We get to use the OR function. Logical test, we can put as many trues and falses in there. And OR, when it sees one or more, will report a true to the cell. Close parentheses. Now, we did a bunch of function argument array operations, which means this is an array formula. And in order to get this to calculate correctly, I have to use the special keystroke Ctrl Shift and Enter. Immediately, I look up to the formula bar and verify that the curly brackets are automatically put in by Excel. You cannot type those in. Those are Excel saying, hey, I understood this was an array formula and calculated it as an array formula. I can double click and send it down. And look at that. Now we get our true, true, and true. Those records should be extracted. Now, I want to show you an alternative to running the OR function. I hit F2 there. And I'm going to keep just the search part of this, Control C, and then I'm going to highlight everything, and Control V. Now, what's so nice about the OR formula we just did is the logic of it is easy to understand. But you do have to use Ctrl Shift Enter. So I got to show you a trick I first saw from Barry Houdini at the Mr. Excel message board back in 2007 about. He actually won the Mr. Excel message board challenge with this exact formula. Now, what Barry Houdini said was, hey, if this is just delivering an array of errors and numbers, why don't we just use a lookup formula to look up the last number? And he used the lookup function. Now, the lookup function is the original lookup function before VLOOKUP and HLOOK. And the advantage to this is that it can handle array operations without any special keystroke. And the lookup function only does approximate match lookup. Well, if we're trying to find the last number using approximate match lookup, we just have to, for our lookup value, put in some really big number that will be bigger than anything in the resultant array. So I'm going to choose to put the number 2 raised to the 15 power, comma. So what it will do is this big number will always race through here. And since it's bigger than any potential number that search is spitting out, it'll always find the last one. If the resultant array is all errors, it'll return an error. And that will say to us that this record should not be extracted. Now, why the number 2 to the 15th? Well, actually, the maximum number of characters that you're allowed in a cell is 2 to the 15 minus 1. So by using 2 to the 15, it'll always be bigger than anything that search can spit out. And that's it. Close parentheses. Control Enter. Error means don't extract. Anytime we see a number, that means extract this record. Now remember that 6, for our data analytics, there was a 1 and a 6 in the resultant array. So of course, it got the last one, which was a 6. But it doesn't really matter what number it is. As long as it's a number, that means we want this record. Now I'm going to come up to the top, F2, and now we can wrap ISNUMBER around this. Come to the end, close parentheses, Control Enter, double click and send it down. We get the same exact result, but we don't have to use Control Shift Enter. And lookup. Lookup is one of only a few functions in Excel that can handle array operations without a special keystroke. When you download this workbook, I'll have this formula, and off to the side I'll have that first formula we saw also. But now we have a column with trues and falses. So if we want to extract records, we simply come to the filter drop-down, uncheck false and blanks. Look at that. I forgot to copy all the way down. So I'm going to come to the bottom one here, double click and send it down. Control up arrow. Now, filters are awesome because in any Microsoft tool, whether Excel or Power Query or Power Pivot, anytime you run filter, you get a unique list. And so there's our unique list. I know I only have trues and falses. I'm going to uncheck false, click OK. Now watch this. This is an amazing thing about filter. I highlight just the field names, not including this column here. Control Shift down arrow. Now I'm going to use Control backspace to jump back to the active cell right there, just so we can see what happens visually when we copy a filtered data set. Control C, and there they are, all the dancing ants just around the visible records. All of the rows that are hidden, meaning it did not match our criteria, have not been copied. That way, when we go over to the sheet Paste Filter, click in cell A1 and Control V, there are our records. Now I'm going to click up in the upper left-hand corner and then double-click any column header to best fit all the records. And so there it is. Copy and paste, only the visible records. Come back over here. Escape turns the dancing ants off. We can unfilter. Now, one disadvantage to a helper column and then filter is that you have a lot of formulas in your spreadsheet. Well, if we've already created the helper column and we know the logic of the very first formula for the first record, we don't actually have to copy it down. We can use that formula with something up in the Data Ribbon tab, not the filter, but Advanced Filter. Now, the way this works, and I'm going to copy this formula in edit mode, Control C. That is the first formula for the first record. And we simply have to paste it off to the side, Enter. And normally with Advanced Filter and D functions, you actually have to list a proper field name and then the criteria. But when you're using a formula as criteria, you paste the formula, and then above you either have an empty cell or put any text you want. And Advanced Filter will take the formula, and in memory, it will copy it down the data set, establishing a pattern of trues and falses, and so it'll exactly know which records to extract. Not only that, but there's another advantage. Now, I want to get rid of the ISNUMBER, backspace. And just for a second, I'm going to copy it down to remind us what we did earlier in the video. This was the step before we put ISNUMBER. Well, conditional formatting and Advanced Filter will automatically interpret an error as false and any non-zero number as true. So that's actually the formula we need. Now, remember what we said. We only need the first one, so I'm going to Control Z. It will copy this down in memory. All right, so here we go. We have our formula, our header for the formula criteria. And I want to paste the extract on the sheet Advanced Filter Extract up here. Now, if you want to use Advanced Filter to extract on a different sheet, you actually have to start the Advanced Filter on this sheet. So Data, Advanced Filter. And here's our Advanced Filter dialog box. We first select Copy to another location. The list range or the table, we actually have to click on the sheet and highlight the table. I'm very carefully highlighting just the field names, and I'm not going to include the contains column. And now I'm going to use the keyboard Control Shift down arrow to highlight all the way down to the bottom. Now I hit Tab to move to the next text box. And watch what happens when I hit Tab. it jumps to the next text box, but always it jumps back to the sheet. So now our criteria range is back over here, so we have to click on 1382, scroll all the way up, and here is the cell above the formula and the formula. Again, that cell above the formula can be empty or have any text you want. And then Tab to get to copy to, and I'm going to select cell A1. And now when I click OK, just like that, it is extracted. Now I'm going to highlight everything, double click to best fit all the columns. And there we go. There we have extracted the data set. And again, we did not need this column at all, and it used that formula to extract the records. Now actually, I like the advanced filter solution best amongst all of the solutions. Now we did filter and helper column and advanced filter formula criteria. Now let's go look at an array formula. All right, I've clicked on the sheet 1382AF for array formula. Now we're going to see how to do this with an array formula. I'm not so sure that this would be my first go-to solution, especially on a large data set. But when would we do formulas as opposed to advanced filter and filter? Well, if we really needed the solution to update instantly when any data changed, that's when you use formulas. Now, the most inner part of our formulas over here, and we're going to have two of them, one to count how many records to extract, and then our extracting formula, is still going to be the search function. Now, remember what we did. We did a function argument array operation with find text. I said, please go look simultaneously for all three items, comma. But over in our helper column in advanced filter, the within text was a single cell. Close parentheses, F9. Remember what that delivers, 1, 2, 3 items. That means it checked all three items against this one job title. Control Z. Well, if we're going to do an array formula, we need to simulate that helper column. So watch this. For within text, I'm going to highlight the entire range. Now what this means is I'm doing two function argument array operations. Now there's a fundamental problem with this. This is a single column, one column with 1, 2, 3 rows. This is a single column, one column with 7 rows. We cannot do array operations if we have a single column with different number of rows. Let's just evaluate this and see what happens. F9. Sure enough, it checked the first three items, but because they're not the same size, it means missing 4 rows, we get these 4 NAs. Well, guess what? If this data set here happened to be not in different rows, but in different columns, we are allowed to do an operation on a set of columns against a set of rows. Control Z. So what can we do? We can come to the find text and use the transpose function. Now, the transpose function is an array function that will take a range filled with 3 rows, and it will distribute it across the columns. Now, we want to learn something about array syntax. I'm going to click inside transpose, click on array, hit F9, and array syntax will always use curly brackets to house the array and semicolons to mean go down a row. Our data originally was in rows, so that semicolon means rows. Control Z. Now, if I click inside search and highlight find text, which is the whole transpose, this is delivering items in columns. So when I hit F9, curly brackets still house the array, but there it is. Comma means column. And I always remember because comma starts with C and so does column. There we go, over across the columns. And we're allowed to do these two function argument array operations against each other because this series of items in columns will be checked against each row. So 1, 2, 3 will be checked against data analysis job title. 1, 2, 3 will be checked against accounting job title. So Control Z. Now we come to the end, and when we F9, our knowledge of array syntax comes in handy because we can see the curly brackets house the array. But look at that, comma, comma, semicolon. That means 3 items. It checked data, BI, and business intelligence against data analysis and delivered the items in columns. Then it went down to the next row, which means now it's checking accounting. Value, value, value means it did not find any one of these items in accounting. You could see all the way across our array syntax is always comma, comma, semicolon. 3 items in columns, go down a row. Now, I want to notice one last thing in our last record. Notice it reports 9, 16, and value. That means it found data in the 9th position. It found BI in the 16th position, and it did not find business intelligence. Now, we talked about OR logical test. Notice for this one series of tests, 2 numbers means 2 truths. So later in this formula, if we're not careful, we might double count, and we don't want to double count. Now, our next step is going to be to convert the numbers and errors to truths and falses. Control Z. So I'm interested in numbers, so I use ISNUMBER. Come to the end, close parentheses. Now when I hit F9, there's my truths and falses, including 2 truths for the last record. Control Z. For our formula, we're going to need to convert those truths and falses to 1s and 0s. Any math operation on truths and falses converts them to numbers. I'm going to use double negative because that is the most efficient. That's a unitary operator that tends to, especially in large array formulas, calculate more quickly and efficiently than other methods of converting truths and falses to 1s and 0s. Now I come to the end in F9. There's our resultant array of 1s for true, 0s for falses. So again, that double 1 at the end means we have 2 matches for that last record. Now what I really need is I need to simulate that helper column. We need as if we had a helper column here and copied it down. So what I need to do is I need to check each record or each series of column entries for each one of the job titles. So I really need to add 1, 0, 0 to get 1, 0, 0, 0 to get 0. And then at the end, I need to add 1, 1, 0 to get 2. So the way we're going to do that is with matrix algebra, and in specific matrix multiplication. Now I'm going to get super tricky here. I'm going to copy this in F9 edit mode. Then I'm going to Control Z. Then I'm going to put a space before the equal sign to temporarily suspend that formula. And now I want to come over to the side. And remember, I copied 3 columns by 7 rows. And now in the top cell, I'm going to type an equal sign, Control V. And this is an array, which I'm going to enter as an array formula simultaneously into all the cells using Control Shift and Enter. That's the shape of our array. 7 rows by 3 columns. Now, in order to add each one of the rows, we're going to do matrix algebra. And we're going to, over to the side, in the active cell, going to type 1 and then Control Enter to populate all of those 1s down. Now we have 2 arrays. And the way matrix multiplication works is first, we have to check if the columns of the first equal the rows of the second. And notice I did this little diagram up here. Actually, in my book, Control Shift Enter, Mastering Excel Array Formulas, I have a whole chapter on the function we're going to use, MMULT, and have the same similar diagram. I did row, column of the first, row, column of the second. The inside column, row have to be equal, or else you cannot do multiplication. Not only that, but the first row and the second column define the resultant array, which is 7 by 1, which is exactly what we need. Now, I want to show you how matrix multiplication works. And notice 3 by 3 have to be equal. And the reason why is we take each row in our first data set and multiply it 1 item at a time at each one of the items in this column. So the actual longhand way to do this is we say first item in the first row times first item here plus second item in the first row times second item in the second array plus third item times third item. Now, I actually want to copy this down and show you what the resultant array looks like. So I need to lock all of these elements. So very carefully, I'm going to put my cursor on L11, F4, L12, F4, and then the L13, F4. So that's the calculation, both multiplying and then adding. Notice the result is because we have all ones multiplying by all of these, it simply adds the items from each row. Control Enter. And copy it down, all the way down, including that last one where we got 2 trues. There's a 2. That is our simulated helper column where anything greater than 0 equals true. Now, let's look at the MMULT, because we certainly don't want to do it that way in our formula. And the MMULT function will actually deliver the entire array simultaneously. So because it's an array function, you have to highlight the range in advance before entering the array function in the active cell. And of course, it has to be exactly 7 by 1. So you ready? Active cell equals MM. There's our MMULT function, matrix multiplication. We simply give it array1, comma, array2. It will do all of the multiplying and adding and deliver this 7 by 1. Now, I close parentheses, and because this is an array function, I do not need to lock those cell references. The same formula will automatically be entered into every cell when I use keystroke Ctrl Shift and Enter. I immediately look up to the formula bar to verify that the curly brackets have been put in. And there we go. Much easier than doing it the long way. And we'll be able to use this in our formula over here, and it will deliver this array of values, which is our simulated helper column. All right, you ready? So I'm going to come over here and get rid of the leading space right after the equal sign, MM tab. That is our first array. Come to the end, comma, and in curly brackets, 1. And we're going down a row. So we use semicolon 1, semicolon 1, and curly bracket, close parentheses. Now, my cursor's at the end, so if I hit F9, there is my simulated helper column for counting records that contain at least one of these contains criteria. Control Z. Now, I don't really want to leave this hard-coded in. Excel's golden rule says if a formula input can change, don't hard-code it in. Refer to the cells in the spreadsheet. Now, these cells are supposed to be referring to these. Well, guess what? If I inserted a new row, pushed this down, and typed out a new criteria, that would not recognize it. But no problem. There's a simple formula element that can simulate this vertical array of ones. I'm going to use the row function. Row, and I'm going to highlight the criteria, close parentheses on row. And now row, this is a function argument array operation. So if I highlight the whole thing and hit F9, it says how many different separate rows are there in that range? 2, 3, 4. Well, that certainly isn't 1, 1, 1, but no problem. Control Z. Any number raised to the 0 power is 1. So that is our formula element, F9, to create a vertical array of ones. Control Z. And again, if we insert a row, that will update. If we inserted a row right now, it would show us 4 vertical ones. Now I come to the end and F9. There's our simulated helper column. Now, I need to count in this formula, so I'm going to have to ask the question, are any of you greater than 0? Control Z. So now I come to the end. Are any of you greater than 0? Cursor at the end, F9. There's my series of trues and falses, including true instead of 2 for that last record. Control Z. I need to convert them to 1s and 0s so I can add, so I use double negative. F9, wait a second, that did not work. The order of operations, Control Z, got in the way. Comparative operators evaluate in Excel formulas after math operators, so I certainly need to put parentheses around that comparative operator. And now with my cursor at the end, greater than will calculate before the double negative. F9, and there's my ones and zeros that I can add. Control Z. Now, this formula right there has the transpose function. And no matter what other function we might put this into, we're going to have to use Ctrl Shift Enter. So I'm not going to use sum product. I'm going to very explicitly use the sum function because I don't want to accidentally have anyone look at sum product and go, oh, yeah, that's one of those functions that can do array formulas without Ctrl Shift Enter. I want to explicitly say, sum is a function that requires Ctrl Shift Enter. So now I do Ctrl Shift Enter, and there is my count. Now, when we come down and create our extracting formula, we're going to have a very similar formula element. So I'm going to hit the F2 key up here. And I'm very carefully going to highlight the MMULT function all the way to there. Control C to copy, escape. Now I'm going to come down here, equal sign, Control V. And I'm going to highlight this whole thing, Shift, click at the beginning. And I need all of these to be locked in all directions. So I hit the F4 key, and that locks all of them. Now, if I have my cursor at the end and use the F9 key. And now what we have is zeros and numbers greater than 0. Any non-zero number is interpreted as true by logical functions, and 0 is interpreted as false. So Control Z, I'm going to use that resultant array to actually pick out the correct relative position of the items in this data set. So I'm going to use the if function. In the logical test, we have zeros and non-zero numbers indicating true and false, comma, the value if true, meaning I have a number, in our case, greater than 0. I'm going to create an array of all the relative positions. So I'm going to say, hey, there's row F4 close parentheses of all of those cell references. If I highlight this in F9, that gives me 7 all the way to 13. But I really want 1, 2, 3 all the way to 7. Control Z. So I'm going to subtract row of the first item in the list, F4 close parentheses. Notice there's a C7 and C7, so the first number in this resultant array would be 0, and I don't want that. I want the first number to be 1, so I add 1. Now, in the value if true, if I F9, there's my array of relative positions. Control Z. The trues and falses here will pick out the right relative positions. I leave off false because when I do that, false will be put into the resultant array. F9, and look at that. There's my relative positions 1, 3, 6, and 7. That means I need to extract record 1, 3, 6, and 7. Control Z. From that array, I need to extract those relative positions, the first smallest, second smallest, and so on. So I'm using this small function. The array, that's all of those items. I come to the end, comma, and the K. I need 1, 1, 1. 2, 2, 2. So as I'm copying down, I need to increment numbers. So I'm using the rows function. I'm sitting in A18. So I'm going to type $18 colon A18 close parentheses. That little formula element as I copy down will count rows with an S. So 18 and 18 is 1, but when I copy it down and that 18 turns to a 19, it'll give me 2 and then 3 and so on. That's the K in small, close parentheses. By the way, I'm not using aggregate here because we have a bunch of array calculations that require Control Shift Enter, even if we put it into aggregate. Now I'm going to test this. I'm going to use Control Shift Enter. I look up to the formula bar. I see my curly brackets, so I've entered it correctly. That is simply number formatting. So I go up to Home, drop down, and General, or I use the keyboard Control Shift grave accent tilde. That gives me my 1 first relative position. I copy it down. There are the relative positions. We will turn those num errors off in just a moment. Come up to the top cell, F2. I'm going to use that in a lookup function. So I use index. The array, that's the array of items I potentially want to look up, retrieve, and bring back to the cell. I'm going to hit the F4 key once and twice to lock the row. So when I copy it down, it's locked. But when I copy it over to the side, it properly moves to the next column I'm trying to extract items from. Now I type comma. And that row number is that huge array formula element there. I come to the end, close parentheses, Ctrl Shift and Enter. I look up, I see my curly brackets. I know it calculated correctly. I'm going to copy it over and then double click and send it down. Now, these are dates, right? And I'm going to add date number formatting in just a second. But first, I want to turn off the num error. F2, I do not want to use if error. If I used if error every single cell, if error would have to run that huge array formula in every single cell, including these cells down here where we don't need it to run. So for large array formulas, I'm not going to use if error. I'm going to use the if function and choose an alternative logical test that calculates much more quickly than that huge array formula. And I'm going to cheat. I'm going to come to the end and highlight rows, Control C, and then probably I can make life easier on myself if I type a comma and keep all of that there, and then click on logical test and build my logical test. Control V, anytime the number incrementer 1, 2, 3 is greater than my count, F4 to lock it. That means I'm past row 4 down here. What do I want in the cell? Comma. I want to show nothing. Double quote, 0 length text string that will show nothing. Notice that little bit right there and the logical test are the only two things that calculate in all of these cells down here. It's only the top 4 rows that actually ever make it to the value if false and run the array formula. I come to the end, close parentheses, Control Shift Enter, copy it over, double click and send it down, highlight Control 1, click on date. That one's fine. Click OK. And there is a crazy data extraction formula. If I change something here like accounting and BI and enter, instantly the extracted records update. Control Z. If I were to come over here, now watch this. I should have made these all Excel tables, but I didn't want to do that. Have to be required to use table formula nomenclatures. But let me just show you that this is updatable. If I drag this down here and then type asset, now we have a new condition. And there it is, Asset Manager is extracted. If we were to go F2 way over to our array 2 and hit the F9 key, we can see now there's 4 ones in our vertical array of ones. Now I'm going to click Escape to revert back. Control Z. That was a pretty crazy set of array formulas. You can see why the first 2 solutions are much easier to do. But if you really did need to have it dynamic, this will work. There's our counting formula. Here's our extracting formula. But back over here, we had a helper column. And then we did filter. But by far the best and easiest one is that simple formula and advanced filter. All right, we'll see you next trick.